Whoops, the seats are taken. Oh, I didn't see it. Good evening. I would like to call the second session of the 2008 annual meeting to order. We do have a quorum, more than 200 town meeting members. First, one logistical issue. A pair of glasses was found in one of the seats following Monday night's meeting. So if anybody has lost a pair, please, they are here. Tom's, our town administrator. So. They're not, oh, they're not here. False alarm. I would like us to start this meeting, if we could rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. Flags of I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Just a couple of preliminary comments. I won't review all of the procedures or tellers, but we will have the same tellers that I named on Monday. The officers and members of the committees who are not town meeting members but who were admitted previously to the meeting will be again. I will ask now the town clerk to read the return of notice for this evening's adjourned session of the annual town meeting. Dolores?
Adjourned annual town meeting. I, Dolores A. Keefe, town clerk, do hereby certify that I gave notice of the adjourned session of the annual town meeting held on April 28, 2008, by posting an attested copy of the notice of adjournment on the town clerk's official bulletin board in the town hall and at least 5 other places in the town, giving notice that the annual town meeting had not been completed and had been adjourned to meet again on Wednesday, April 30th, 2008, at the Belmont High School auditorium at 7:30 p.m., briefly stating the business to be acted upon, all in accordance with the Representative Town Meeting Act of 1926 as amended and Section 2.5 of the General Bylaws of the town.
Are there any newly elected town meeting members, new or re-elected town meeting members who were not here Monday and should be sworn in as town meeting members? Would they rise? I don't know if there are any. Okay, seeing none, we won't. We'll proceed. Was there any? I didn't. Did I? No. Okay. On the, let me just, I won't repeat the rules and procedures that I went over on Monday, but I just want to highlight 3 that I think are important in the context of the issues we're talking about tonight. One is the keeping to a 10-minute limit, and I will remind you when you hit the 10-minute mark, and I think that's one key point. A second is amendments. We received, and we will debate the amendments on Article 10. We have which were available on Monday. We have a revised motion on Article 20, which you received on Monday. Other than that, there have been no other amendments, so any amendments from the floor will need to be simple and not substantive. Thirdly, the issue of speaking to the either the motion or the amendment that we're considering at a particular moment in time. Talked about that on Monday, and I think that's particularly important in terms of the range of articles we're talking about tonight. So I will intend to enforce the issue of germanity, if you will. At this point, I want to ask Angelo Ferenzi to read a well-deserved recognition.
Angelo Ferenzi, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 3. Move that we remove Article 1 from the table.
Oh, the recognition first.
Oh,
For Henry?
those have to be read before? Okay, I'm sorry.
No.
I apologize. Okay. All right, we have a proclamation from the Board of Selectmen that I've been asked to read. Whereas Henry Hall has served the town as an elected town moderator for 17 continuous years, from April 1991 until April 2008. And whereas as town moderator, Henry Hall has presided over town meeting and ensured that the business of the town was conducted in a fair and efficient manner, and was responsible for appointing the members of the Warrant Committee, the Capital Budget Committee, and the Permanent Building Committee. And whereas Henry Hall was born in Sandwich, Mass., and is the proud father of 2 children, George and Hank, and resides in Belmont with Jean, his wife, of 49 years. And whereas Henry Hall attended the University of Massachusetts Amherst and George Washington University Law School, is a veteran of the U.S. Army and a retired partner of the national law firm of Ropes & Gray of Boston and coordinator of Public Law Group. And whereas Henry Hall has been a school committee member and a past chairman of the Minuteman Regional High School from 1971 to 1983, and was instrumental in the fruition and development of the Minuteman High School as it stands today. And whereas Henry Hall is a member and past chairperson of the Massachusetts Moderators Association since 1991, and has participated in a wide variety of major state and New England associations, including the American Massachusetts and the Boston Bar Association, the Massachusetts Municipal Association, the Massachusetts Taxpayers Foundation, and the Massachusetts Association of School Committees. And whereas Henry Hall has been an elected town meeting member from 1970 through 1994, and town meeting member at large from April of 1991 through April of 2008, a member and past chairman of the Permanent Audit Committee since 1979, and member and past chairperson of the Bylaw Review Committee from 1978 to 1991. Therefore, the Board of Selectmen joins with the town of Belmont in paying tribute to Henry Hall for his invaluable contribution and lifelong dedication, and wishes him and his family much happiness and good health in the future. Signed, Angelo Ferenzi, Chair, Dan Leclerc, Vice Chair, and Ralph Jones, Selectman. We're going to have a chance to do this again very briefly. I've been asked by Representative Brownsberger to read a resolution from the Massachusetts House of Representatives. Resolution congratulating Henry L. Hall on the occasion of his retirement as Belmont Town Moderator. Whereas Henry Hall was first elected Town Moderator in Belmont in April 1991 and has served with distinction and the highest integrity. And whereas Henry Hall also served as an elected town meeting member from 1970 to 1974, and thereafter as a town meeting member at large. And whereas Henry Hall's commitment to the public service has included terms on the Minuteman Regional School Committee, the town's bylaw review committee, and the permanent audit committee. And whereas Henry Hall is a retired partner of Ropes and Gray Boston and was coordinator of their public law group. And whereas Henry Hall is a member of the American, Massachusetts, and Boston Bar Associations, and whereas Henry Hall's professional memberships also include the Massachusetts Municipal Association, the Massachusetts Taxpayers Foundation, the Massachusetts Association of School Committees, the Massachusetts Moderators Association, and the Boston Minuteman Research Bureau, and whereas Henry Hall's personal generosity and gifts to support educational and civic enrichment in the town of Belmont have given substance to his steadfast goal of making Belmont the best it can be. And whereas as part of his responsibility to make appointments to the Warrant Committee, Mr. Hall was mindful of increasing the number of women serving, of having representatives from all precincts, all ages, and all walks of life to truly represent the town as a whole. And whereas Henry Hall always endeavored to be sure that the building committees were constituted in a way that reflected the town, making sure to find appointees with expertise in finance, the law, engineering, and construction, as well as neighbors, I was afraid that was mine, to and users of the project. Therefore, be it resolved that the Massachusetts House of Representatives congratulates Henry L. Hall on his long service to the town of Belmont and wishes him and Jean a happy and productive retirement, and be it further resolved that a copy of these resolutions be forwarded by the Clerk of the House of Representatives to Henry L. Hall. House of Representatives adopted April 22, 2008. Salvatore F. DeMasi, Speaker of the House. Stephen T. James, Clerk of the House. Offered by Representative William N. Brownsberger. Again, Henry.
Just a couple of words. I just want to thank you all. I'll keep it by less than 10 minutes, anyway. I want to thank you all for the kind applause and welcome. I'm going to miss the town meeting, but not totally. I think we'll go home and watch you on TV tonight. Thank you very much, everybody.
Jane, I'd like you to come up and receive these flowers from the town clerk's office, because for over 17 years you have loaned Henry to us, and he has been invaluable in his expertise with us, and we appreciate it, as I'm sure every town meeting member here does. Thank you.
One sec. Henry, I just want to echo the sentiments and express my personal thanks to you for your guidance over the last several weeks in helping me succeed you. So thank you. Mr. Ferenzi.
Now, I'd like to remove Article 1 from the table.
There's been a motion to remove Article 1 from the table. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? It's approved unanimously. I'll call on Pat Bruce to give a brief report on the Wellington.
Mr. Moderator, Patricia Bruce, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 2, and Vice Chairman of the Wellington Building Committee. Mike called me and asked me if I would speak briefly about the Wellington tonight, and he explained to me that part of his reason was we had discussion on Monday evening about the roads under the capital budget, and therefore about the roads override, which is on June 9th, a Monday evening, 4 weeks from next week. And we also had some discussion about a potential for an operating override next spring, and he felt that the third leg of that was the Wellington School, and that it was only right that the town meeting members also hear a little bit about where the Wellington is right now. So I'm going to do that for you very briefly. As most of you know, 2 years ago, town meeting voted a statement of interest to be submitted to the Massachusetts School Building Assistance Bureau, and that was done on both the Wellington School and Belmont High School. There had been a moratorium on the state participation in school building projects since 2001. So that moratorium lasted from 2001 until July of 2007. In July of 2007, the School Building the School Building Authority accepted applications for school projects. Quite honestly, when they started, they thought they might get 50 to 100 projects. On July 30th, they had 406 projects presented to them. And so they notified all of the communities and asked each community to prioritize their projects, because clearly some communities had more than one project, as did Belmont. The Belmont School Committee met in August, and they prioritized the Wellington School as the #1 project for Belmont in terms of the school system. The Capital Budget Committee, Warrant Committee, and Board of Selectmen have also met in joint session over the past few years and have prioritized the Wellington School as the #1 building project for Belmont going forward. So we are all unanimously going forward with the Wellington School. The project was submitted, as I said, in August. There were 126 projects that were then prioritized #1 from those 406 projects. And in October, the School Building Authority made public their list of the projects that had been accepted to go forward, and Wellington School was among those projects. The next step was in February. In February, the School Building Authority asked Dr. Holland, Dr. Aubin, Dr. Missel, Angelo Ferenzi, John Bowe, chairman of the school committee, and myself to come to a meeting there and discuss the project, which we did. They had a number of questions, and they told us that they thought at that time that our time frame of hoping to go forward with a debt exclusion at the November presidential election ballot was probably doable. That was about as far as they would commit at that time. Since then, they have been exchanging information with the school department back and forth to get all of their questions answered. And we are hoping that we will hear from them sometime in the next 3 or 4 weeks to hear what the next steps will be. Will Brownsberger, our state representative, has been very supportive of this entire project, and he is following it very closely with Catherine Craven, who's the executive director of the School Building Authority. And we think that we probably will be hearing from them very soon. We did hear from them this week on their enrollment projections. They hired an outside firm to look at enrollment projections for all of the communities that have projects before them. And when we received ours the other day, we were fairly confused because they actually recommended or suggested that they were seeing that we may be 800 students lower 10 years from now than we are now, and that's not making any sense to us. So Dr. Holland has already submitted a whole lot of material to them to ask them how they arrived at these figures. And so we anticipate having a meeting with them in the next couple of weeks to straighten that out, and then we think we probably will be moving forward. The Wellington parents have organized a group of people who will be working to educate the public as soon as we have a formal go-ahead. That group is being chaired by Karen Parmet. And Karen, I'm not sure if you're here tonight. I know you were, there she is, right there in the middle waving. So if any of you want to help with that or want to get educated, please contact Karen. And I think that's all I am going to say right now, but I look forward to your support in November. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bruce. Mr. Ferenzi, motion to put.
Angelo Ferenzi, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 3, move that Article 1 be placed on the table.
All in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Passes, approved unanimously. We now return to Article 10, and I will start the at this moment on Article 10 to ask Ms. Burke to make her amendment, the first of the two amendments, because we're discussing under Article 10 the first motion. So we have not yet reached the 2.5 million from the operating override. So it's the first motion, and so I direct your attention to that. Ms. Burke, if you would make your amendment, I will then turn briefly to the Warrant Committee and Capital Budget Committee for their report on the votes of their committee, and then I will turn back to you, Ms. Burke, to if you wish to make a statement and the Board of Selectmen, and back to you to make a statement, presumably in support of your amendment, and then I will ask Mr. Curtis to speak on behalf of the Warrant Committee and the Capital Budget Committee in terms of their vote, and then I will open it up. So, Ms. Burke, go ahead.
Okay, Rosemary Burke, Precinct 2. My proposed amendment is as follows. The existing language is said sums to be expended under the direction of the Board of Selectmen, the library trustees, and the school committee as appropriate. And I insert, provided that not more than 1% of the pavement management program be appropriated for police details. End of my amendment.
Thank you. I'll come back to you in a minute to make a statement if you'd like. I presume you would.
Yeah.
Okay. The report of the Warrant Committee, please.
The Warrant Committee unanimously recommends unfavorable action.
The report of the Capital Budget Committee.
Capital Budget Committee also unanimously recommends unfavorable action.
And the report of the Board of Selectmen.
Board of Selectmen unanimously recommend unfavorable action.
Ms. Burke, go ahead.
Can I come forward?
You may.
First of all, I want to thank Town Meeting Member Joe White for moving to table further discussion of Article 10 until tonight so that my amendment could be heard. This amendment is being made in the spirit that I know we all have when we come to town meeting, and that is to serve our constituents well and to try to do the right thing. We often find that the financial matters are so complex that it's tempting to leave it up to the boards and committees who have spent months working on them, and to just say aye at the appropriate time. Programs and activities all around town have been scrutinized and downsized, and I think we need to take another look at the allocation of money for police details as well. This amendment seeks not to eliminate, but to reduce the amount of money that can be allocated to these details for road construction. If all of the proposed funding mechanisms for road repair and construction come to fruition for next year, the $2.5 million proposed override, the $1 million prior year override, and the $400,000 passed in Article 8 on Monday, about $3.9 million will be spent on road and sidewalk construction. The current practices allow for about 7 to 9% to go to police details. For the proposed override in June alone, that's between $175,000 and $225,000 that's been earmarked for police details. I think we can better serve our constituents by reducing that amount so that more can be spent on actual repairs. This amendment seeks to allow for up to 1% of road repair money to be spent on police details to cover instances when a policeman is truly necessary to direct large volumes of traffic around a dangerous work site. On June 9th, voters will be asked to support a tax override specifically for road repair, and there is talk of a need for a general operating override in the near future. Voters should have no doubt that town meeting members have made every effort to contain costs and have taken every opportunity to rethink policies and practices that money is being spent wisely. We all appreciate the many volunteers and employees who work on the town's behalf, but the amount of money being spent on police details is excessive. By supporting this amendment, we can be sure that money allocated to road repair will not stray from its intended purpose. This practice of assigning police details for road work is unique to Massachusetts. Its estimated annual cost is $1 billion. There is no state law requiring that a policeman be present at road construction sites, and there is no local law. It has been a practice that has taken on the expectation of permanence. The matter of the union contract will be brought up by opponents to this amendment. There is language in the contract about extra details. but nothing stating that they are required for road work. There is language stating that assignments shall be voluntary. If details for road work were critical for public safety, would the assignments be voluntary? In Belmont, the road construction contractor goes to the police department, who schedules the details and sends the bill to the Office of Community Development. There is no option to discuss the necessity of the detail, and no bill goes unpaid. When my own street was redone 4 years ago, close to $110,000 was paid out for police details, even when the street was often closed off to traffic. As town meeting members, we can do better for our constituents and for our community. This amendment recognizes the occasion when a trained police officer might be required to be present to assure the public safety at a hazardous construction site, when a civilian flagman or proper signage won't do. This amendment does not seek to eliminate, but to reduce the amount of money allocated to police road details. When education programs, services for the elderly, and the VFW Post have all had to modify their programs and practices because of limited resources, we should see the same exercise of restraint in the matter of police details. I ask you to support this amendment.
Mr. Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I just wanted to spend about 2 minutes explaining the vote of the Warrant Committee. And basically it comes down to whatever your, excuse me, your view on police details for construction projects. Our pavement management budget is not the proper forum for going about effectuating change here. Not, at least not if we want to have pavement management. Ms. Burke is correct. As far as I know, there's no state law requiring the use of police for traffic details. There's no Belmont ordinance or bylaw that calls for this either. And she's absolutely correct. The contract, the union contract with the police and the superior officers doesn't mention anything specific about police details. However, there's a really important provision here, and that is that decades of decisions by labor arbitrators hold the following. Point number one is that where it's a long-standing practice to give particular work only to a member of a collective bargaining unit, which we do here, and we've done for a very long time, probably as long as these arbitrators have been making these decisions. Number two, where that work is of a significant economic value to the people who are doing it, which it indisputably is here. It's a very high economic value to the police who are doing it. Then the work in question is bargaining unit work, whether or not the collective bargaining agreement addresses it specifically. It is bargaining unit work. So the result of, if we adopt this amendment, there's two outcomes as I see it, or as the Warrant Committee sees it. Number one is we will fix our roads up to the 1% level, which is $10,000 of a million. And that will, then we'll stop. And frankly, if I were the town's labor council, and I'm not anyone's labor council, but if I were the town's labor council, I would tell them to do that, to fix them up to $10,000 and then stop working on the roads. That means that we would fix 1/7 to 1/9 of the roads that we need to fix, because we do spend 7 to 9% of the total construction pavement management on police details. The second possible outcome here, if we decide to go ahead with what I think the spirit of this amendment is and hire flaggers or use proper signage, is that as soon as we have a situation where a policeman would have, under the current state of affairs, performed the construction detail, we'll have a grievance filed by the union. I fully expect that they should do that. They ought to do it. So they will file a grievance. We'll have an arbitration before one of these labor arbitrators a year or so later. These things take a while. And we will lose. The arbitrator will then award back pay for every hour that a policeman should have been on the construction detail to the police bargain unit, and they will distribute it as they see fit. And the net result of that is that we will have not only paid for the flaggers, the civilian flaggers that we hired, but then we will later pay the amount of money that we would have paid in the first place for the police detail. So again, without going into whether we should change this, or what my personal opinion is not really important on this subject. I think that the result of this amendment will be, as I said, we'll either not fix very many roads, or it'll wind up being a whole lot more expensive. And so I would urge town meeting to vote against it. Thank you.
Is there a discussion? Yes, sir.
Vincent Stanton, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 3. A question for Mr. Curtis. So the situation you described seems to be a catch-22 in that there's no contractual or legal obligation to hire police for this work.
Well, there is, in fact, there is a contractual obligation, just isn't written in. You're not going to find it by reading the contract. So it is very much a contractual obligation.
But there's no contract that could be changed because there's no
Oh, sure there is. You know, if what you're saying is, can you ever do something about it? The answer is, of course you can. One thing you can do, I mean, the pattern or the doctrine that I'm talking about, namely that where you've got a long-standing practice that's of economic value, and that creates the obligation to give that work to the collective bargaining unit, you can sit down with the unit in question and say, we'd like to change it. So we would like, in this case, you would bargain with the police officers in the town where you wish to effectuate a change, and we say we'd like to be able to use civilian flaggers for this kind of work. And you'd work it out with, I mean, they may not agree, but that is an avenue for change.
But is there actually any language in the contract that you would change? You would just change the understanding.
In this particular example, you would add language to the contract saying that in however you want to describe it, the basic point being that if you have a construction project, that it's up to the town management, which means the police chief, to determine whether or not you will use a civilian flagger, as Ms. Burke says, proper signage, or a trained police officer. But that certainly is something that can be done. That hasn't been done, but that could be done.
So even though there's in the contract no explicit right for the
you're not going to find a.
I think he's answered. I think he's answered the question.
Okay. Right. Thank you.
Yes. Mr. Laughlin.
I'd like to address Malcolm Laughlin, Precinct 5. I'd like to address another aspect of what Phil said. First, I would say, though, I think that it's something we ought to do something about, and the tendency of government here in many places seems to be just to roll over and play dead in front of the unions. And I think we ought to do something. But to be specific, if you put up a sign, it seems to me there isn't any work that is being done that you're paying somebody else for. So how can a policeman claim that he should have done the work? And I drove, coming home from work today, coming through Cambridge, I went by one site. It extended maybe 4 feet into the road. There was a policeman standing there, not paying attention to the traffic. This was a rush hour. I'm sure there's a lot of these, so what about that?
Well, I want to make clear that we're not defending this long-standing practice. I'm simply explaining to town meeting what the consequence, in our view, of adopting this amendment would be.
And I want to say, I don't think this is germane to the discussion. We're not reviewing police details in Cambridge or in the state. We're considering this amendment.
I'll end by saying I'm glad to hear that sort of thing from the town meeting moderator, so I'll hope that I'll get another chance to bring it up.
Mr. Mercier.
Donald Mercier, Precinct 8. I'm reading the figure here of 7 to 9% of the total spending project goes towards police details. Now, what we don't know, and maybe you can answer this question, is if those police are replaced by flagmen, same man for man, what is the difference between what we pay per hour for a police officer and what we might pay for a flagman? The difference is what we're going to be saving if you ever went in this direction.
I'm not, well, again, I can answer that question if you want me to, Mr. Moderator.
Yeah, I think it's
basically flagmen are cheaper. And
No, I'm talking about dollars. Let's use
well,
numbers.
no, Brent, let me get to the dollars. There's a report done by the Beacon Hill Institute for Public Policy Research, which you may be aware of, about this very subject. And in 2003 or 2004, whenever the numbers were done in the report, the average salary paid to police across the state was $34.70 an hour, and flaggers ranged from about $9 an hour up to the mid to high 20s if there's a particular kind of well-trained flagger that's more expensive.
Okay.
So you
Ms.
might
McGaugh?
save 50%.
I think,
Is that your best?
Again, that's you. I'm not prepared to discuss that. I'm simply saying
I think he answered the question.
why we've recommended no vote.
Ms. McGaugh?
Eloise McGaugh, Precinct 1. First, I want to thank Rosemary for this amendment because it shows the kind of creativity that we should be thinking about in terms of what goes into these expenses. But secondly, being somebody who is involved in labor negotiations, past practice is extremely difficult. And so I understand what the Warren Committee is saying in terms of even though things are not written into the contract, when it's past practice, it could really come back to bite us. I think this is an issue that needs to go larger than Belmont, but I think it's a great start for us to start questioning it, and I'd hate for us to just sort of roll over and play dead and say we can't do it without saying that this change has to happen.
Yes, sir.
James McIsaac, Precinct 4, Town Meeting Member. Just, I know we're not discussing the details, but just a correction that I would argue is flagmen, you'd have to pay the prevailing wage, which I believe is $37 an hour.
Yeah, I didn't want to get into the prevailing wage thing, Jamie.
Ms. Page?
Jennifer Page, Precinct 3. I understand that there is another cost that we also bear, and that is that I understand, and so I'm asking if it's true, that the amount that the police officers get for the details is considered in the same way that their salary is in determining pension. Is it calculated into the pension?
I don't know the answer to that question, actually. No, it's not. Barbara's saying no.
No? Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to ask Mr. Roger Rubel, Precinct 5. I'd like to ask Mr. Curtis, in his description of what the town could do in order to change the practice, if the town came to the collective bargaining and said we would like to insert this language into the contract to reverse the past practice, and the police union said, well, no, we don't want you to, what would be the recourse of the town at that point?
Okay, Mr. Curtis is no longer a labor employment lawyer in his day job, so I don't have a complete answer to that. I'll just say that there's a long and complex process where a public safety union in a town cannot get to agreement on a contract provision that includes, at the end of it, an arbitration where we don't have the right unilaterally with a public safety union to implement a contract provision. And there is an arbitration provision at the end of a long process. And quite frankly, on this particular issue, where the practice is so widespread in Massachusetts, ingrained in every community in the state, I think we would probably lose. That's just my personal opinion.
Mr. LeClaire?
Excuse me, Dan LeClaire, Town Meeting Member at Large. I really appreciate the frustration that you all feel. I feel the same frustration myself when I see very expensive police officers doing jobs that are way below their actual skill level. We train police officers for sophisticated work, public defense work. I don't think we train them for that level of activity, but we have to pay for it. I also appreciate the intent on the part of those who support it to make a statement. I like to make statements all the time. But I don't want to make a statement that's going to hurt the town. The practical and pragmatic reality is that this is going to put our roads program at a crushing halt. Also, when I ran for Board of Selectmen, one of the 3 pillars upon which I ran was to properly respect all the people in this town. We have more than 30 commissions, committees, and authorities. Hundreds of people that really work hard to make this town better. We had a number of people who worked very hard on the Pavement Management Committee for several years to put together a very comprehensive and reasonable report designed to put together a rational program to maintain our roads, fix our roads for a 25-year period. And every year we do not do this program, the roads will decrease not at an arithmetic rate, but at something more than arithmetic, some exponential rate. This could delay our program for years to come, could cripple it. And I wouldn't be one to want to ask, after we do nothing, after we literally crush our program, to make a symbolic point, to ask 20 people to join a new pavement management program 5 years from now to try to undo the damage that's been done by making a statement. Quite frankly, I think it's flies in the face. I think it's a slap in the face, and it's disrespectful to the people who've done a lot of work in this community for a concrete purpose. Excuse me. Therefore, I think this is good public policy, the roads program. And I think it ought to be a model. Now, I agree that we as a leadership ought to try to do something about this. I ought to take a look at this. That's the way to do it. Form a special committee for us to look at it, to work with the police chief, board of selectmen, treasurer, work with folks in the legal profession, labor relations, who might be able to help us put together perhaps a more rational program on how do we allocate safety officers in road repair work. But meanwhile, you know, we need to make a practical choice here. And I'm appealing to all of you to please respect the work that the Pavement Management Committee has done, and please respect those folks. You may not all agree or may not all vote for the roads override, but should there be a majority of the town that does in fact vote for the roads program, out of respect for their vote and their citizenship, I think you should consider voting no in this amendment. Thank you.
Ms. Mann.
Ann Mann, Precinct 4. Several emails went around about Ms. Burke's amendment today, and some people did want to support it because they thought the cost was too high, and since we can't all whisper back and forth. One thing, I think that the police, when they get their salaries, they count this in. If you write the governor and you ask him to look at it, he can do that, but Dan LeClaire, I believe, is right. There has been too much work put into this project, and so I would go with him on that. Thanks.
Marcy Shore-Hirsch, Precinct 6. I'm curious to know what the timetable would be for the negotiation for the next round of contracts with the police. Because while I understand the pros and cons, I do have to ask the question, if we embark on a 20-plus year plan that we're committing to for road repair, that looks like very big dollars at 7 to 9% over the next 20 years. And I just wonder what our leverage would be as negotiators in a bargaining situation once that has been approved and moving forward. So I guess what I'm asking is, would it make some sense to consider deciding perhaps to go ahead with the road program pending conclusion of a negotiation so that you could have the opportunity to hang on to the yes or no vote on this project? Because I think once you say yes, it's absolutely impossible to be in a bargaining position to be successful.
Mr. Cohen.
Martin Cohen, Precinct 3. Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, I urge you to defeat this amendment, taking this into consideration. I don't know whether the proper price on average, and that's the important consideration here, on average, is 1% or 5% or 10% of the project cost. But I do know that a percentage cap is not appropriate. Consider, there are some projects in which one police officer will suffice, others may require 2. Projects proceed at different paces, so that the time that one needs a police detail will take a different percentage of the cost of the program. And so, regardless of what the number is, and I suspect that 1% is much too low, a fixed percentage cap is not at all appropriate in this case.
Is there other discussion? Seeing none, we'll take a vote on Ms. Burke's amendment. We're voting on the amendment only at this point, and If you support the amendment, obviously vote yes. If you oppose the amendment, vote no. All those who support the amendment, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. The noes have it. The amendment is defeated. We now turn to the full motion under Article 10. We had considerable discussion on Article 10 the other night, but is there other discussion? Seeing none, we'll take a vote on the full motion under Article 10, the capital budget. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? The amendment, the article is approved. The motion is approved. We'll now turn to the second motion, Mr. Leclerc, under Article 10.
Article 10.
Dan Leclerc, town meeting member at large, moved that the town appropriate $2,500,000 from the Road Stabilization Fund for the pavement management program, contingent upon the establishment of said road stabilization fund, appropriation of said sum of money, and voter approval in a special election is provided under Article 25 of this warrant.
The Warrant Committee?
Warrant Committee unanimously recommends favorable action.
Capital Budget Committee?
Capital Budget Committee unanimously recommends favorable action.
Ms. Burke, did you want to make the amendment again or not?
Well, no, I don't have any, the language, the amendment.
Well, you have a right to have us consider.
Are you asking my options to withdraw this amendment? Or?
No, you don't need to withdraw it. You just don't have to make it if you don't want to make it. But if you wish to make it, you may, because that's up to you.
Okay, well, I guess I won't.
Okay.
Given the resounding defeat of the first motion, amendment.
All right, so there won't be any amendment under this motion. However, there's general discussion, obviously, subject to your desires, on the motion itself. Ms. Bass.
Actually, at Sue Bass, Precinct 3, actually, I do propose an amendment, which is a spelling error. If you notice in the fourth line, it says said sum of money, but it spells it S-O-M-E, and I think it would be better just the more usual spelling in this context.
I think we'll accept that amendment. Yes. Mr. Conti.
Just to clarify, if you actually look at the wording of the motion as printed in your motions and as read by Mr. Leclerc, the spelling mistake is only on the slide. Thank you.
Is there any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, we'll vote. All those in favor of this motion, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? It's approved unanimously. We now turn to Article 4, the main budget article. I will call on Mr. Curtis, who will make a brief present as chair of the Warrant Committee, who will make a brief presentation on the overall budget and financial picture of the town. And then we will, as is our custom, turn to a series of motions, which will be up on, I think, on your screen, and they're in your packet. A series of motions under Article 4, category by category, general government, public safety, and so forth. And for those of you who are new, as we cover each category, that's where we will have the discussion of any particular item within that part of the budget. And then at the end, we will have a final motion approving or not Article 4. So, Mr. Curtis?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Phil Curtis, Chair of the Warrant Committee and Town Meeting Member from Precinct 5. What I want to do is going to be hopefully pretty short, and it's basically just to block out the major components of the budget, both on the revenue side and on the expense side. Look at what we did this year, spend a minute or less discussing how we managed to avoid an override this year, and then have a look at what next year, how it's shaping up a year and a half in advance. So, Jeff, first, when I think of a budget, the first place to start is, of course, how much money are you taking in? So revenues obviously are the first side of this thing. And this is what the FY09 revenue picture is. You can see the items listed there, that all of which go into our gross revenue of $81.1 million. The two that I've got kind of highlighted in orange are two items that we will not have as much of next year as we do this year. So anyway, so this is, the total amount is $81 million. We don't actually have $81 million to spend on the operating budget. So Jeff, if you move to the next slide. We have what I have called net discretionary revenue, because out of this $81 million, there's money that we really don't have any, or either next to no or next to no choice about spending here at town meeting. And those are listed as the non-discretionary expenses. The overlay is money that we set aside for the assessors to cover litigation and to cover unpaid taxes. State charges, quite frankly, I'm not sure what they all are, but there are many of them. Debt service is what it says. Retirement is our contribution we discussed Monday to, that we make as requested by the retirement board. The OPEB contribution is actually discretionary. We can choose to do that or not. That's our token, if you will, contribution to post-employment benefits for town employees, which means health insurance that we promise to pay out. And then finally, Minuteman. So the total would all sort of characterize as non-discretionary items in the budget equals almost $13 million, which leaves us really with $68.5 million to spend on operating the town in every respect. And the way that shook out this year is up there in front of you. And I'm not going to go into or sort of remember all of the discussions that we had, which started in early January and seemed to continue on for quite a long time. But in the final analysis of the $68 million, the school department budget takes somewhat more than half, and obviously the town operating budget, what's left over. The $459 will go straight into next year's free cash. Actually, let me spend 1 second on free cash. So free cash was a concept that I found sort of elusive for a long time, and I think many people probably continue to do so. Free cash basically is certified at the beginning of the fiscal year and then can be applied to the next fiscal year. It has three major components. First is, what did we carry over into free cash from the year before? Second is, what revenues did we underestimate? In other words, what amount of money did we take in that we hadn't anticipated? And third is, what did we not spend that we'd budgeted for? So those three things taken in total equal free cash, and free cash is certified at the beginning of July, again, for the year, the next year. So in July 1st of 2005, for application in FY06, we had $1.5 million in free cash. July 1 of 2006, for this year's, for this year's budget, we had $4.8 million in free cash. July 1 of 2007, which we're applying to the FY09 budget, is about $2.9 million in free cash. So we have had a lot of free cash in the last two budgets, almost $8 million. And that's basically the reason we've managed to avoid having an operating override. And the sources of the free cash, as I said, are many. I mean, within those three categories, there's a lot of things that go into it. And I'm not going to sort of read them all off. The sort of bottom line is that we live in a very well-managed town, that the treasurer has been able to achieve better returns on investments in the last couple of years than anticipated. The treasurer has been able to collect delinquent taxes at a greater rate than we'd anticipated. That's gone down on the revenue side. among a few other things. And on the expense side, the town departments have been able to return money back to the budget that they haven't spent. Again, totaling, we've been in a very favorable position with a lot of free cash. We expect, and we don't really know, we'll know in July when it's certified, that next year's free cash picture will look a lot more like the FY05 number, namely about $1.5 million, than it does like the last 2 years, much more than that. So what's next year looking like? On the revenue side, this is what we're right now, a year in advance, kind of anticipating. Property taxes will go about 3%. Motor vehicle excise tax, a couple of percent. They'll go up more if you guys all buy BMWs and Mercedes. Miscellaneous receipts up a little bit. State aid, we're hoping, will continue on the trajectory that Will Brownsberger discussed. Free cash, right now, looking at it, appears instead of $2.9 million, or $2.4 million rather, more like $800,000. And the assessors returning the surplus amounts from the overlay account instead of $1 million down around $450,000, and the rest of it is about the same. So the net of all that is, even though taxes will go up, 2.5% plus new growth, and everything else will increase, we may only have in fiscal 2010 about $500,000 more to spend than we did this year. So looking at what accounts for that, basically less free cash, and we've depleted the overlay surplus, and that's no one's fault. I mean, we're fortunate that it was there this year, but next year the contribution from the overlay will be more or less what it's been in years past. So we're sort of under revenues by almost $2.3 million. Next year's expense picture, and by the way, the increase in expenses from last year, FY08 to FY09, was actually fairly modest, 3.9% I think on the school side and 3.8% on the town side. That's not bad. So if we apply a 3.8% increase just in the discretionary spending, that add about $2.6 million to the budget. This year, in FY08, the school department was able to basically generate internal savings of almost $400,000, which they were able to apply to their budget. It's not revenue, but it's internally generated savings that allowed them to continue programs without taking money from the budget in the amount of about $400,000. So if you just add up those two amounts, we're at a $3 million increase in necessary expenses if we want to continue the same trend that we've been going, and it appears that we'll have maybe $500,000 more in revenue right now than we did this year. So that we're sort of looking at right now about a $2.5 million difference between what we'll take in and what we would wish to spend if we have about a 3.8% increase across the board in our discretionary spending. Things we don't know. We don't know what the retirement contribution will be next year. You heard Monday night that our estimates are based on, I think, an 8% return, and right now, this year has been far below that, as it's certainly been in my retirement account, and I expect everyone else's. We don't know for sure what state aid will bring. Energy costs could continue to rise. Health insurance might be a bright spot. I want to say one thing about that, which is that it's mentioned in the Warrant Committee report, but Belmont as a community has done very well in health insurance this year for a number of reasons. One of which is that our town employees have agreed with the town management. There's still one union that is still under negotiation, but everyone else has agreed to roll back the premium contribution that the town makes from 90% to 80% on the HMO and from 80% on the PPO to 75%. The unions have also agreed to a market-based plan design. And those two changes, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, are almost unique in the Commonwealth. No one else that I'm aware of has done that, and we should be proud of it. The other thing that we did was we moved to a self-insurance program where we self-insure for health insurance. That has resulted in administrative savings of a significant amount of money. We have built up, the goal at the beginning of the self-insurance was to build up a fund of $2.5 million to cover unanticipatedly high claims, and we expected that to take about 2 years to develop, and I'm pleased to say that we're on track to have that in 1 year, which is great. We were able, through the combination of those things, to scale back an anticipated increase of 7% in health insurance down to 3.5%. And if that trend continues, then health insurance, it's still a lot of money, but the account will grow at a much lower rate than we had anticipated. So next year, so that's the, that's what we're looking at basically is, at this point, it could change, but a gap between what we're going to take in and what we might like to spend of $2.5 million. If we want to spend more, obviously, it'll be greater. If we want to spend less, it'll be smaller. What I would like to do in terms of budget planning is come to the town departments, to the town administrator and the school superintendent early next year with our best guess as to what the revenue picture is going to be, not factoring in an override, but what are we going to take in without an override, and then ask those departments to come up with a budget spending that amount of money, which is our non-override budget. And we'll also ask for what they need actually to run their departments and to maintain the services that we've all come to expect in Belmont. And so hopefully we'll begin a conversation in January that'll have both of those figures in mind, and it'll be very public, and people will be aware well in advance of the necessity for any override vote. So that's the basic summary of where we are and where we're going, and I guess I'd be happy to take questions if they're...
Why don't we proceed to the motions?
You want to go straight to the motions? Okay.
Do you want to give a report of the warrant committee on all of these motions?
Sure. Well, I'm going to go back and get the motions because I didn't bring them up with me. Actually, I did. Never mind. Here they are.
For the town meeting, you have all the motions under Article 4 in your packet?
There's several motions under Article 4, and the warrant committee recommends unanimously favorable action on each of them. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to read the, actually, I want to say one other thing. Everybody's been given tonight a 3-page summary of the budget, and we had thought that it was in the packets that were mailed out. Of course, I didn't actually open my packet until it was, a couple days ago. So I didn't notice that this wasn't in the packet, and so we regret that they weren't handed out until today. They're in stacks if you don't have one. There's one innovation for this year, which is in the far right column, has percentages. It's not up there. It's in the 3-page thing. So we'll see if next year if we put the percentages in there, depending on the reaction of the town meeting this year. I just want to explain 2 things on this 3-page summary, and that is that the percent changes that are in the far right column are from the...
Moderator, excuse me, could we have someone distribute to the people who don't have them?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Why don't you, Mr. Curtis, why don't we get them distributed, and then you can resume. Yeah, no, I know. It's what he...
Have the motions, right? Okay.
That's what he just said.
Come up and sit on the stairs when you're...
Come up pretty soon.
Great job.
Jeff, do we go to each of these things?